Great. So thank you, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me. As it said, I'm going to talk about the RPS, the LRPS, what the requirements are, and then we're going to look at the, Brad and Mike have very kindly volunteered to be guinea pigs to put their panels forward. However, they've done it more or less blind because they haven't been to this talk, they haven't had the background. So it's quite good because you can actually start seeing what works, what doesn't work, and actually get a better idea of things you need to think of around the panel. So they've been very good putting themselves forward as guinea pigs. So first of all, starting off with a disclaimer. I'm not an official RPS assessor. Therefore, I'm not in a position to give you formal advice. This is to give you a flavour of what the RPS is, a flavour of what the LRPS is, talk about things you really need to consider. But if you actually decide to go this route, and I'll talk about it in a second, there are some formal routes to get the support you need from official assessors. But first of all, probably, why did I do it? I mean, I'm a little bit of an oddity. I don't very often confess this, especially as I'm judging. I actually started photography around 2013, 2014. I did my LRPS in 2015. So I'd basically been photographing for 2 years when I did my LRPS. Now I have a bit of a head start. My mother was a photographer, so I've kind of grown up looking at all her images and looking at what she's done. She's also gone through the RPS route. And I also had some very experienced people giving me guidance and feedback from day one. So I kind of started with a massive head start compared to everybody else. But I mean, it was a really good challenge to set myself. But I think the thing is, kind of putting it into context, it is achievable. Where some of you will be going through if you want to do it, you'll be going through your entire back catalogues and trying to desperately search among zillions of images, what should you do? Or looking to shoot fresh. It literally, the panel and my spares, which took the advisory day, were literally my entire back catalogue. Luckily, I got the panel together from them, because if they hadn't actually worked, I would have probably had to go back to the drawing board. So I had nothing else to call upon. So why did I do it? It's partly, why do you do anything like this? It's a challenge. It's proving something to yourself. It's like, it's an element of ticking a box. I've been there, I've done it, I can do it. It's also it helps in terms of self-confidence. Actually, you know what? I've done this. I am good enough to do this. And I've achieved it. So, I suppose those were sort of my key drivers, and probably not having much of an understanding of what I'd actually agreed to do and got collared into by my mother as well. Probably something to do with it. So if you're interested, we talked about me not being an official assessor. These are the people you need to get advice from. The RPS, so the assessment days are where you actually go through your assessment, but they offer something called advisory days. And you can attend these both as spectators, but also submit your proposed panel and spares to get feedback. And what they'll do is they'll look at the panel, how you've put it together, and the individual images, and they'll give you feedback on whether they think it's suitable to go forward for accreditation, whether you need to change things, what you need to focus on. They'll swap images around in the panel to create that whole cohesive feel. We'll talk about the 11th image coming up. So it's a really good resource. And also, RPS are now doing one-to-one advice by Zoom as well with official assessors. And the assessors and the people you get advice from, they sit on the panel for assessing the ARPS, the LRPS, and the FRPS, which I'll explain in a moment. So they're the people who know. If you don't have I'd say if someone offers you advice and coaching to go forward for this, if they're not an assessor, say thank you, take their feedback, but then also go the formal route. The other thing about the advisory days, I'll say, is, and I'll probably repeat this a little bit later on, and it's really important to focus on. The success rate for people who've attended advisory days is far, far higher than those who haven't. So you really can't recommend it enough. So basically, what will I cover, and we've covered this briefly, what do I hope the outcomes of this will be? So basically, it's giving a bit of feel of the RPS, the LRPS, how to put a panel together. That in itself is an art. And there's something called the 11th image as well, which is not actually an 11th image, it's how they fit together as a cohesive whole. And then also look at what are common reasons, what are good positive feedback, but also what are common reasons for failing. Because if you know what they're looking for, then you know what pitfalls to avoid. It just puts you into a stronger position. And then talk through what happens on the day. The RPS on their website provides examples of successful panels. So I think it'd be good for you guys to actually have a look at those. And also then my panel from 2015. Then we'll finish off with Mike and Brad's panels. I should warn you as heads up, the first little bit is going to be quite a lot of information. It's going to be technical and a bit wordy. Bear with me, it's just the first part. It puts context around everything else. We'll go on to the pictures and images afterwards, but it really does benefit from having the actual technical context. So RPS, it's a charitable organisation founded in 1853. And this is also a membership organisation. So this is a constant area of tension for them. How do they fulfil the charitable goals, but also keep their members happy as well? So they're constantly being pulled into two directions by that. The objective is making art and science of photography more widely available. And through this, they offer a diverse programme, includes exhibitions, talks, workshops, and symposia. We were chatting a little bit about this before we started. They have an extensive range of Zoom. I mean, the COVID has actually been brilliant for them because they've literally moved to the 21st century, and they've got this extensive range of Zoom talks they put on. And the prices range between free and around 60 quid. There are a few more expensive ones, but I'd say the typical price you'd pay to attend one of these is about £3. And with that, they have some really top people. You have some, okay, obviously it's always a mixed bag. You're not going to have everyone who's great, but you do get some top professionals with really established reputations globally, and from a whole range of disciplines, from sort of documentary, journalism, landscape, creative, you name it, they'll have talks to actually meet that interest. And it's also about learning about, if it doesn't cost much as well, you might not know something about an area, so you learn more about it. So they have commitment to supporting young and emerging photographers, annual bursary scheme, offers sponsorship for environmental, postgraduate and social documentary research. It's also divided into regions. So, and each region puts on its own events, and they've got responsibility for deciding what they'll put on. And they've also got special interest groups as well for you. So if you're interested in scientific photography, for instance, they've got a group for that. They've got a group for documentary. They've got a group for, well, they've got a lot of groups. It's 11,000 members worldwide. So, I mean, that's a little bit about the RPS itself. I think one of the advantages as well is it's open to everybody. So whilst some of the other photographic organisations are more professional based, RPS welcomes both professional and amateurs with open arms, and they aim to encourage and develop and help people. So they offer 3 distinctions. These are their sort of qualifications. The LRPS, Licentiate of Photographic Society, ARPS, Associate, and FRPS, the Fellow. FRPS is the most senior. For the LRPS, you need to show a variety of approach and techniques, but not necessarily subject matter. It's evidence of creative ability and high technical standards appropriate to your submission. It basically involves 10 images, and it's strong focus on camera craft. It shows you that you understand how to technically take photographs. You're able to control your exposure. You understand what good looks like in terms of the conventional good. It's not about artistry. It's just, can you demonstrate to them that you can actually, you know what the average correct is in terms of controlling highlights, stopping blocking out shadows, you know where to focus, you've got some good idea of composition. We'll talk more about that in a moment. The ARPS, this now moves on to projects. The ARPS and FRPS are project-based. So ARPS is a project body of work. You've also got a written statement of intent to go with that. And this is what are you trying to convey with your images. The ARPS is 10 images, the FRPS is 20. And as a friend of mine describes it, LRPS is about the camera craft, it's a technical bit. Can you actually, or as another friend of mine said when I got my LRPS, I've now got a qualification in turning my camera on and off. Obviously he's a little bit more advanced than that. He's got an evil sense of humour, but it is that technical bit. A is about demonstration of a clear vision, starting to show your personal style. And F is all above, but pushing the boundaries further. And when you go to A and F level, it moves from, it's all about, say, projects, cohesive body of work. So they actually divide it into categories. So you have applied and portraiture. Applied is photography for a purpose. So for instance, are you producing this work for a book? Are you producing this work for a documentary? Are you producing this work for a newspaper or magazine article? Are you producing this work for a wedding? It has to have a purpose. Or advertising. Contemporary, this is much more conceptual. It's photography that communicates an idea or a vision. Then we've got documentary, film, landscape, natural history, all pretty much as it says in the tin, travel again, and then visual art, which is photography which communicates a vision. So if we hear people talk about fine art, generally that kind of fits more into the visual art side of it. So a little bit of background of that. So the LRPS, how can it be achieved? Basically, there's 3 routes you can go for the LRPS. 10 mounted prints, 10 digital images for projection, or a book containing a minimum of 10 images. A minimum of 2 copies must be supplied. Now, I did mine in prints. I know a bit about the digital. I have no idea about the book, so please don't ask me questions about that. I think the book is a new edition, and there's increasing popularity for people producing books. The prints must be accompanied by a hanging plan. The RPS are in the process of changing a few things about how they run this. So not all of this is on the website. As a little confession, my boyfriend is the regional organizer for one of the RPS regions. Hence, I get him to translate what they're doing and tell me. But since 2021, the hanging plan's known as presentation layout. This hanging plan is pretty much, I'm just going to call it a hanging plan. It's always been known as that up to this point. It's pretty much as it says in the tin. The reason why you have this with your images is it shows them. So if you're doing prints, when you go to Bath, they will put them up on a stand which has 3 rows. It shows them which order you need to put the prints up in. You don't get marked on it, but it does show which order the images should appear in. In terms of the panel itself, if you're doing prints, the RPS can be quite conventional about this. You're limited, especially on prints, in terms of how you display. Their stand is only 3 rows and is a fixed height. So you tend to be, your presentation tends to be relatively conventional in 1, 2, or 3 rows. And it's basically be assessed against the following criteria. And they've got an assessment Bible I'll show you in a moment. But it's these 4 things: camera work and technical quality. That's the technical aspect. That is probably the strongest area of focus at this level. Then visual awareness, which is composition, communication, storytelling, overall impression, and that's about the panel itself. How do all the images work together? So this is what their assessment Bible is. So when you go for your LRPS and they're assessing your images, they will have the assessors, and I'll talk about the day later in a moment. The assessors will have this with them. There's the 4 areas which they look at, and it guides them on whether the panel is up to standard as per the actual requirements of the LRPS. So it's so the camera work and technical, it's things such as depth of field, highlights, shadows, color management is a big thing, processing faults, digital defects like halos, artifacts, chromatic aberration. So it's not just technical in actually taking the image, it's a technical in processing it as well. The visual awareness is more about the whole composition side of things. And it's basic understanding such as separation. Is it clear what your subject is? Is your subject blending into the background? Do you have a tree growing out of somebody's head? Do you have an understanding of light? Are you able to remove distracting backgrounds? Appropriate use of monochrome. It's also, and this kind of comes into the technical as well, monochrome, what they look at is good tonal range. Are you able to produce, does your monochrome look flat or has it got depth to it? And then communication is, they've got that here, it's clarity of intent, point of interest. It's more, I'd say the focus is more on these first two parts than this part. Obviously, that is good, but the key focus will be the camera work and technical quality. And also this final bit, the overall impression. And that is to do with a panel. How do they all work together? Do all the images fit together? And I'll talk a little bit about this is how you build a panel. Does it look like you've put the images together with thought and consideration and attention to detail in terms of which image do you put where in the panel? Or does it look like you've just thrown them together? And there's various conventions within this that you need to follow. So putting a panel together. We start off with something called the 11th image, and you'll hear me refer to this a number of times. It's not actually an 11th image. It's so they look at the 10 images. How do they all work together as a whole? So if you don't focus on the details of the individual pictures, but stand back and look at them as a whole, how do they all actually work together? It can be deceptive if you're not used to the terminology. Then I'd say a key thing also to think about when you're putting a panel together, don't get attached to any images. Because you know what? And I'm going to talk a little bit about it and show you things I've done on mine. You're going to have to fiddle them quite often, unless you shot particularly for the panel. So if you need to, so it's looking at the sizing of them, are the sizing of them. So images 1 and 5 need to mirror each other sizing wise. 2 and 4 on so this is a 2-row panel of 5 images in each row. 1 and 5 at either end need to mirror each other. 2 and 4 need to mirror each other. So sometimes you're going to have to crop bits off, stretch bits, and change the colour slightly, desaturate, change the warmth, just to create that cohesive whole so they all look like they actually fit together. Is also something also to think about is it is better to have, don't always try and put your absolute best, amazing, jaw-dropping image in there. It's very tempting to go, this image is absolutely awesome. It's just the best thing I've ever taken, probably I ever will take. I want to include it. However, if you put that one in, you're going to make the rest, what was good images, actually look a lot worse in comparison. So you're better off having 10 good images than 9 good images and 1 outstanding image, because that 1 outstanding image will make your other 9 images look worse in relation to it. So it's consistency of quality and standard across the whole. We talk about variety, and this is because you're showing a range of, you're showing technical competence that you're able to use a range of different skills to take photos. And the best way you can do this is to show a range of different images. So there's different focal lengths, different angles, different shutter speeds, quite often different subject matter, although not, you can still do it the same subject matter. It's having a lot of varieties through. So when the judge looks at it, they can see you are a photographer with a lot of strings to your bow and able to produce a wide range of work appropriate to the actual subject matter. Back catalogue of shooting fresh. And this is what I came back to. As I said, when I did mine, I'd been photographing for 2 years. It was my entire back catalogue. However, if you've got a really long back catalogue and you've got a lot of images which have been processed, carefully processed to bring the best out of that individual image, they may not all fit together. It may actually be quite hard also with so many images to choose which ones to include. So sometimes you could almost consider shooting for a panel. So what do you want to do? Show a range of different skills. So actually purposefully go out and shoot images to demonstrate that range of skills. So it's different approaches. PDI versus print. Why a lot of people, and this is a constant debate, the advantage of print is that you control exactly what the judge sees. You know exactly what you're looking at, and the people assessing your image will be seeing exactly the same thing as you. On screens and monitors, things can vary, sizes vary. And this is why a lot of people will go down the print route. It just has that a little bit of control in some ways. Obviously, even though COVID's happening now, they're still doing assessments for print images. The way this works is people sit at home, the panel sits at home, they get sent the digital copies, but there's also one gentleman, a print expert, who has the print copies. The panel will look at the digital copies and then refer to him for the quality of the print and any concerns about the printing. So you're not just, that's the other downside of the printing. So you're not just then judged on the actual image themselves, you're also judged on the print quality. So swings and roundabouts. Size, why do I put that there? The larger your image is, the more likely it's to show defects. Things become more obvious the more you increase an image size. So for the LRPS, they typically say images around A4 work well. By the time you get to A3, if there's a slight defect there, it may be hidden in the A4 size, but A3 will be magnified. And don't forget, these judges here will be actually looking specifically for technical quality. So it's different from Camera Club judging, which is about storytelling, narrative and such like. This is technical. Paper, consistency of paper. If you print and you had 8 images on matte paper and 2 on glossy, it wouldn't form a consistent whole. It would look, the glossy ones would stand out. Also, glossy tends to be very, as a whole, even if you do it all glossy, it tends to be very unforgiving. So a luster paper quite often works better. Mounting, mounts obviously need to be good quality of mounting of your images. They've got to be consistent across the 10 images. And also, they say neutral colours. So for instance, sort of creams and whites, black sometimes if it suits the subject matter, although that can be more contentious. But if you put your image, you might love the idea of creatively putting your image into a red mount, but it could actually compete with the image, drain the image. It's better to have that neutral just to show the image off to its best effect. I don't get too arty at this level. So the 11th image, and this is how well do your images hang together a cohesive unit. After this slide, I've actually got a couple of examples which I can talk you through. So the first things that the panel will look at is what's that first impression of your panel. They'll and I'll talk about this again as we go through what happens on the day. But they'll actually, first of all, they'll stand back and look at it. They're not looking at individual images. How do your 10 images fit together? Do they form a cohesive, consistent picture? Have they got equal visual weight? Do the shapes on either side balance each other? Do the image sizes work together, or is there a lot of variety of image size? It's about balance, a lot of this. So as I said, if you had a panel of 10 in 2 rows, on the top row, for instance, image 1 at one end and image 5 at one end have to balance each other. 2 and 4 have to balance each other in terms of shape and format, like landscape and such like. Colour, do they work together? I mean, it's not 100% got to be identical, but do they work together overall to create that consistent feel? So if you had, on your top row, if you had five images, most of them were really blue toned, then image 2 at the side was a bright red, it would stand out and glare out. You could have the middle one as bright red, but that's because it doesn't have anything to balance it. And brightness, if you have 9 dark images in one bright image, that won't stand together. And bookends. I always think when I hear that of Bagpuss. I don't know if any of you guys remember the program Bagpuss. The cloth cat It's an old cartoon for kids. I think it was Professor Yaffle, the woodpecker. I think it was a woodpecker at the end. I always think of him anyway when I hear of bookends. But this is fundamentally and I'll show you, it'll be easier when I actually can show you the images. But these are fundamentally the images at either end of your row. They should actually direct your viewer's eye into the panel and not out. So if you think you follow the gaze, if you think about normal photography, leading lines, you look where your subject's looking, for instance. If your subject's looking out of the panel, your eye will travel out of the panel. So, and just to make this make more sense, and this is what I get to use my annotate tool, which makes me very happy because I'm quite sad. So we talk about, if you look at it first of all as an overall whole, you've got images 1 and 5, they're sort of this kind of browny, earthy tones. Then 2 and 4, they're more bluey toned. Number 3, it fits in with the actual top panel, the browny tone, but also it's a central image. It doesn't need to be mirrored by anything. And then if we look down once again in the second row, you have images 6 and 10, more bluey toned. Then you've got the monochromes in 7 and 9. And then this brightly coloured creative image in position 8. And we talk about bookends now. So let me see if I can find my mouse. Where's it gone? I might have to draw something. Yeah, there it is. Gosh, I can't see it. So if you look at, I can't actually see what I'm drawing on, but I'm going to draw an arrow and point. If you look at 1, okay, that's it. 1, the bear, he's looking in. That's a really bad, so I can't actually see where my mouse is for some reason on this. But he's looking in. The owl on the right, there's a strong diagonal line from the bottom right of the picture to the top left. That's keeping you within the frame. The same with the leading lines of the actual pipes and the actual breakwater type thing on the left. I'm going to go and clear that. Is anyone able to do, sorry, I didn't actually realize I couldn't see anything. I've done it, clear all drawings there. Okay, this is confused. If I can get rid of the annotate. This is really confused everything. Escape out there. So bear with me, we've got a technical problem because this has just confused the life out of everything. Okay, that's better. So, and I'm not going to use that again, obviously. So the second one, once again, we talk about the consistent cohesive whole. So your top images have all got this warm, rich tone to them. The bottom images have all got the bluey tone. So it feels thought out. It feels like this photographer has made has really thought about how they all fit together. You've also got the bookends either side. So the owl in picture 5 is flying from right to left. He's flying into the panel. So he leads your gaze into the panel. If he'd been the other direction, he would have led your gaze out of the panel. The bird at image 6, he's looking into the panel. So he's leading your gaze into the panel. So this is what I'd sort of very much talk about when it's the actual 11th image, is how everything works together. So just a little bit of background, these are taken from the RPS website. On the RPS website, they provide examples of successful panels for people to look at. So, so these are taken from that website. Yeah, I've got rid of that, it's perfect. Okay, so then we have examples of positive feedback. I think the reason why I've included this, it's very easy just to put down what could go wrong, but actually it's also really useful to think about what works, what do people comment positively on, what do you need to focus on. Sharpness is good, that's appropriate sharpness. It's range of focal, I'm talking about variety now, range of focal length, good use of different techniques, range of depths of field, variety of subject matter. So all of those, it's talking about having a wide variety of different techniques demonstrated within your panel. I mean, the visual awareness is very much like light, colour, design, and communication, ability to capture the decisive moment, lots of imagination. So these are all guidelines of sort of positive things which judges will look for and they'll reward. I'll just leave it there for a few seconds for people to look at. And then coming on to negative feedback. This is common reasons for failing. And these are the landmines that you are looking to try and avoid. Some are more common than others. I would say the big things which images typically fail on are blown out highlights. And remember, this is not about creative artistic photography. It's about showing that you can technically get it right. The next stage, then you can use it artistically to create mood, etc. But it's proving to they don't know that you can get it right. So even if you've used it artistically, they don't know whether it's an accident or intentional. So it's convincing them that you can actually technically control the highlights. They don't like black shadows. Have detail in your shadow areas. Halos is a massive thing as well. This is generally over sharpening. It's the white line around the edges of buildings and mountains and the subject matter which comes about. And sharpening fundamentally is increasing contrast. And this is why, so when you actually sharpen, it increases the contrast at the edges, and this is how halos can creep in. Pixelation, banding, artifacts, chromatic aberrations, so sort of color noise coming into generally in your darks. A big thing also is wildlife photography. People as well, but wildlife is more challenging because they're smaller, typically, eyes not being sharp. And I think the other thing is, which you can fail on, is and there's images of panels which have done this. The images themselves, individually as standout images, are brilliant. But the photographer has only used one focal length and one camera viewpoint. So for instance, a whole range of macro images. There's absolutely nothing wrong with the images whatsoever. He's obviously very, very skilled. However, he hasn't demonstrated a range of abilities and techniques. So the assessors don't actually know whether he can do anything else other than these macro images with that same focal length and the same viewpoint. Also paying attention to detail, so that's processing, cloning. Color casts are quite a big thing as well. In terms of visual awareness, that's distractions in the background, lack of focal point, and fairly drab, uninteresting lighting, cramped in the frame, overcropped, over-enlarged. And then, of course, obviously, we've got the 11th image. So this provides sort of a good guideline. These are sort of the landmines that when you look at your images and decide on what you're going to include into a panel, these are the things that you want to try and avoid. So in summary, you need to demonstrate you have understood and mastered the basic functions of your camera, or as a friend of mine very unflatteringly told me, I'm qualified, as I mentioned before, I'm qualified in turning it on and off. Thanks, Steve. Have an understanding of composition, excellent editing and attention to detail. And I say this is not about, this level is not about artistry, it's not about creativity, it's about that technical bit. So if you're going for an LRPS, so what would I recommend? If at the end of this presentation, I haven't scared you off entirely and you feel like actually you want to do this, how would you go about doing it? I say my first bit of advice was to go onto the RPS website and search out for advisory days and attend one as a spectator. What happens in advisory days is those people who are interested in submitting a panel for assessment will bring their images, their proposed panel, plus 5 spares to the advisory day. And then someone who is an assessor will review the proposed panel and review the individual images and give them feedback. And if you attend this as a spectator, it's great to learn from other people what sort of feedback they get. You can take the lessons you've learned from other people going through the pain and apply it to your images so that you're in a better position when you do want to bring your own images. Then select 15 images. So, okay, you've now got a better feel of how it all works. Select 15 images which meet technical standards and show variety, work well in a panel. That's a panel of 10 plus 5 spares, because what will happen on an advisory day is they will swap images in and out. So say, okay, that one might not be so good. Hang set, well, looking at spares, that might work. Then create a panel and hanging plan, web templates on the RPS website. Then go book yourself onto an advisory day and submit your panel for them to give you feedback. Make the changes suggested and book your assessment date. Or their assessments are very popular, so you may have to wait a few months before you book it. You could book it in advance, but having seen a few advisory days, both from attending and just out of curiosity during COVID times, people get themselves into trouble where they book an advisory day a week before their assessment day. And then it comes out, they've paid the money for the assessment day, but then it comes out there's real issues with their panel. And they're then a little bit trapped by time. So personally, for me, I'd always kind of get the advisory day under my belt and then book the assessment day, or book the assessment day with a lot of space between the last advisory day. So you've got the chance and time to make any changes you need to make. So what actually happens in the day? Well, apart from you turn up and you're incredibly nervous, I did this in Bath years ago. They've now moved to Bristol. Apparently Bristol's a lot nicer than Bath, because Bath you got to stand around in the reception for a long while. I don't think it was very warm, if I remember rightly. You hung around for a long while and then you got taken to the room and you sat down and they went through. And there's very few facilities in terms of drinks or anything. I think Bristol, they've invested a lot of money there where they've moved in, it's a lot nicer. The process, first thing to say is the process is anonymous. Unless you tell anybody, no one there in that room is going to know that which of those images is your panel, which of those panels is yours, or even if you've got a panel up there, unless you tell them. Typically it's a panel of 4 assessors and 1 chair who does not have a vote. The only time the chair will have a vote is if the assessors are tied, say 2 vote to pass, 2 vote to fail, then the chair will have a deciding vote. To be successful, we've got to pass all the criteria we've discussed. And how it actually works. So the assessors will sit at the front, opposite the print stand, or now obviously in COVID times, they have it beamed to their screen. That makes it sound a little bit Star Trek. They'll first of all look at the 11th image. That is, how do all those images work together? They'll then go up and have a look in detail at the images. And they will be looking closely at them. They're looking for defects. They're looking for reasons why this panel is not suitable for passing. So it's not a sort of overview. They will be looking closely. And then they'll stand back again and look at the 11th image. What will happen then is they actually have 2 votes. This will be the first vote. It's an anonymous vote or a secret vote. Not quite sure how that works, but they don't announce it. They have a little card, which is either green or red. Green, they hold up the green if it passes, if they think it should pass. They hold up the red if it thinks it should fail. They then have a discussion about this. So 2 panel members are asked for their thoughts. The one person from the it should pass school, the one person from it should fail. And they discuss why they think what they do. They then have a second vote to finally decide whether the panel will pass or fail. If it's fast, the photographer's name announced. However, even if it's not quite passed, there are other escape routes. It's not always all doom and gloom. If there's only one image out of the panel they feel is not up to standard, you'll have the option to resubmit. Then also, if there's just one small flaw in one of the images, they might actually still let it pass, thinking actually overall this is a very small minor flaw. Overall, we have confidence that this photographer has the technical competence to get the LRPS accreditation. So there are, I mean, especially with that whole ability to change one image, there is a sort of way out per se. Just because one image has not passed doesn't mean you failed. You got opportunity to resubmit. So successful LRPS panels. And this is, so what I'm doing next, I've taken these off the RPS website. And it just gives you a chance to look at a couple of examples of recent successful panels. So you both get to see the 11th image and also the individual images themselves. I'll go through them slowly and just make the odd comment as we go through. So the first one, somehow the name's been lost off, this one. As you can see, it's a very balanced looking panel. You've got the sizes 1 and 3 mirror each other in sizes. 2 and 4 are more portrait format, but they mirror each other. And the rest are all landscapes. The sizes of the images are very similar. You've also got the colour. So 1 and 5, warm greens. 2 and 4, you've got that sort of khaki-ish green colour coming into it. So it's 6 and 10, dark images, all about the light, similar tones. Then 7 and 9 have got that feeling of lightness, and you've got the strong oranges of the images in the middle. So it doesn't have to be identical colours, but you can see how they fit together. And there's clear thought from the actual photographer how he's going to build this panel. And images themselves. So this obviously is all about this beautiful image, wonderful soft tones. It's all about depth of field. So A, they can do it creatively. A, they can do it technically, but also there's a very strong creative feel here. It's about mood and atmosphere. Once again, it's depth of field, light, demonstrated macro ability to work close up, macro type image, appropriate sharpness, nothing distracting. So very clearly thought how they're framing that insect. Something different, creative use of shutter speed, ICM. More detail. Once again, another close-up image, but now looking down from above. You've got all the spikiness of that caterpillar's hairs. A very clear thought has been put, very intentional decision making as where have you composed, how have you composed this? So the caterpillar is in the bottom right, it's not crossing the vein of the leaf. There's clear compositional decision making taking place. Good use of negative space around it. And this, well, is all about the light. And the photographers here has demonstrated that they have a good awareness of the light and how it can impact the mood, atmosphere and feel of a photo. It's also creative cropping decisions. They haven't shown the whole trees. Once again, it's a creative decision. Mood, atmosphere, light. And here they've shown clear separation of the trees, how they've used the fog to separate the trees from the background. The trees aren't blended into the background, they stand out. The White House creates a strong focal point, and you've got the warmth of the light going across the trees. Across the trees, hills, mountains. All very harmonious colour tones across the image. And then that's a range of different subject matters. But if you're really passionate about a subject, you can still focus on that subject, but just show a range of different approaches. So here, this guy's actually done a mini project for an ARPS. For an LRPS, it's not project based. That's ARPS, FRPS. But here, he's done a project on planes and engineering and flight, and he's shown a variety of different camera angles, techniques, approaches, subject matter, while still following something he's obviously very, very passionate about. And as you can see from the 11th image, once again, it's very clearly thought out in terms of the design. You've got the blue across the top, and then you've got the middle row, you've got the two darker images, the red in the middle, and the brownie tones below. Once again, clear bookends. So the plane number 10 is flying into the panel, right to left. The plane number 8 is facing into the panel. Plane 3 flying in. Plane 1, there's a slight diagonal angle into the panel. So you've got that whole feeling of the edge images holding the eye into the panel. And here, once again, compositionally, you've got the separation of the plane from the sky through the use of the position of it against the smoke, and you've got light glancing off, lighting up the fuselage. Good use of negative space all around. He hasn't felt the need to crop this in. He's embraced the space around the plane, giving it this very airy feel. Detail shot. Here, creative use. Here, it's done something a bit different. It's close up, technical. But he's also got a strong focal point. It's a very busy image. But within busy images work if you create some sort of structure and order with them and some sort of focal point. And here the red and the green provide that really strong focal point to ground the viewer. Here, once again, different subject matter. We've gone from technical engineering to showing a person, but there's clear thought about how he's positioned within the frame. There's no overlap between the person and the wing. He's in his own space. Also depth of field, separating him from the background. More technical detail. Here, obviously, shutter speed, creativity, visual awareness, really strong use of negative space, strong compositional design. Here, shutter speed, you've got the movement in the propellers. More detail. He does like his engineering bits. And here, once again, this is very much about both shutter speed and panning. So you've got the movement of the actual propellers, but then you've got the movement blur of the trees below him. He's also very clearly positioned within his own space in the sky. He's not overlapping the trees. So you've got that separation there. So these are the ones that the RPS have chosen to put onto their website. Obviously, because they've put them onto the website, they choose some of the best to put on there as examples. Some of us are more human, but we can still pass. So don't be intimidated by those. But there was some serious, as you can see, some seriously stunning images there. Now it's coming on to mere mortals, myself. My successful panel, this was 2015. I'm going to first of all show you what I presented to the advisory day, talk about the changes they made, and then show you my actual panel. So this was what I presented to the advisory day when I started. I had to fiddle a few bits. So trying to, as I said, this is my entire back catalogue. I crop for subject matter. I don't do the standard crops, so nothing's the same. That's a challenge in itself when you start putting a panel together. And this is where sometimes it might be better either to re-edit your photos entirely from start or just shoot for the panel. What did I learn? So some of these things have to be stretched. If you look closer, you'll see it more. My boys on the bottom row, the yellow boys, they're not entirely round. They were stretched a bit to actually make the size fit. I also changed the tones of that to make it fit better. We were having to play and juggle with quite a few images in terms of trying to match the sizes. I think my biggest learning point, it may seem very obvious, you can't stretch people, it looks really weird. But there are ways of, other than trying to stretch the people, you can think about actually expanding the canvas, cloning bits on, in cropping bits off. It's just fiddling and adjusting. So turned up for the day, advisory day, a gentleman, Richard Wharton, who sadly, unfortunately, is no longer with us. He was absolutely brilliant. They're so kind, they're so helpful, they're so friendly, they're so encouraging. They make it a positive experience for everybody. Just a couple of changes recommended. So on the middle row to the right, the girl sitting down with a guitar, there was an area, I still can hardly see it myself now, there was an area around her hand or arm that they just didn't feel was quite sharp enough. To be fair, I took this virtually in the pitch dark, so I'm not surprised, but yeah, it was very shallow depth of field. And they also, and I can't remember why, but the little soldier boy on the top right, he was swapped out as well, and I can't quite remember the reason for that. So I kind of went there, really supportive, encouraging. He juggled a lot with all my images and my spares. They do their best to actually help you to put this together. And this was the final version which I came up with. So what I will mention, and this is just as why you don't get voted for marked for the hanging plan, St. Paul's and the bottom second from left is actually a black and white image. This was scanned from years ago. I've no idea why at the time we didn't stick the black and white image in. I think St. Paul's was one of my spares. I had to change it from colour to black and white to fit the panel. I think for some reason we just stuck it in colour there. But as I say, the hanging plan is for them to show where the images go. It's not, they don't judge an image panel from that. But there's a progression from sort of pinks to blues on the top line. Sizes are pretty much the same. As you can see, obviously you grow and change in your photography. I was going through a stage where I vignetted everything within an inch of its life. So it does kind of reflect that. So I do apologise for that. You do evolve, you do develop. And I probably looked at too much Michael Kenner. But that's actually the panel. And then looking at the individual images, it's almost compulsory if you come from the southeast, Brighton Pier, long exposure. And very kindly I had some birds sit onto pillars. But this, once again, this shows control of shutter speed. And also thinking about what time of day do you take the image in, light. Obviously this was done in the evening. This, as you can see, my boys aren't quite round. This was stretched. This was also lightened and warmed up a bit to fit more in with the other images. One of the things they'll pick you up on is banding. In the actual, and you can see it in the sky here, in the actual print, there was no banding visible. But if I'd had that banding in the print, it would have been chucked out. And this is where, when you've got prints, you've got control. This is sea sorter, if anyone gets down the southeast. I've got a thing about places next on this. I've got things about places next to popular holiday resorts. It's always kind of interesting. And Sea Salter is right next door to Whitstable, if you've heard of that. And I basically describe it as the place that time forgot. It's fascinating. But they've got kind of got an element of fishery there. It's just really interesting. And then we have our friends here. This obviously shows, you talk about breaking a pattern and such like. This amused me. This was in a field gate. And I love the fact that all these black cows have gone, okay, you look and check it's safe. He's basically been shoved forward to check out whether I'm A, safe, and B, have I got any food. This was actually, and this is what we get, in photography, you have to be lucky. Obviously, the more you take photographs, the luckier you get. But there is an element of luck in terms of subject matter and such like. This was probably one of the earliest photos I've done. It's probably the first photo I ever entered into a competition. You just kind of got lucky, really. I would have to confess, this is much more by accident than by design, I'm fairly sure, but I think it still works today. But with her, I think they had to crop some of the top and bottom off just to actually bring the image size-wise in line with some of the others. And what I have got in common with my landscape type photos today, sod all in them. And I talked about sort of how do you photograph, what makes you take, it's a really interesting exercise, what makes you take the photographs you do, what inspires you to take the photographs you do. And I say this is, I think, very much as a reaction to living in London. And this is a local point-to-point. It was actually quite, this wasn't when I went to my camera club, but it was actually quite funny when I took my camera club at the time to the first point-to-point. I grew up in the countryside. They're all from the depth of East London. So I'm like, hey, you can just do a meeting. We can go out for a sort of day trip. There's a point-to-point going on in the countryside. And everyone went, yeah, great, fabulous. And then someone went, what is it? Yeah, it's something I've grown up with every day. It's all part of my life. Yeah, I had to do a lot of education rapidly. It's always a great day out. If nothing else, to go and chill in the sunshine on the grass and have a good chat and occasionally photograph horses as they come flying past. And if you get a chance, you get up far closer to horses and point-to-points than you do in any other racing. You can go right next to the jumps of them. Here he's at the start waiting to come. Obviously the horses are a tad excited. St Paul's, it's almost, especially if you live in the southeast, it's almost a compulsory photo. This is from New Change Exchange. You'll see a lot of these photos. It's a rite of passage. I say this is the one which was colour and had to turn black and white to fit into the back bottom row. But once again, it shows architecture, it shows different subject matter. It's all demonstrating a range of being able to handle a range of subjects and having a range of technical ability. And we talk about, I think this was trying to work out what this was. It could have been Moldova. It's all about black and white. It's about having tonal range. It's not having flat black and white, but it's having that strong contrast. Also removing distracting elements from the background. This actually, it might look black and white, but it's actually colour. It's just heavily desaturated. There's just a hint of colour left in, just to give it some depth. Something I was playing with at the time. And then our friends must have been from the same shoot as with all the other bullocks. Again, a different thing, close up. He's rather cute and fluffy. It is a real bullock, not a giant teddy bear, but it was taken in winter. These animals are far, far cuter in winter because they're just so fluffy. And that's such a girly thing to say, I do know. But once again, it's also composition awareness, placing of the eye to the side. It's having a bold crop. So you've actually not just tried to show the whole head, but just crop part of it. There is detail in the shadows on the print. Chinese New Year, it's waiting for the parade. Bored, senseless, quite fed up. He had to wait there for a long while. If you're photographing parades or such like, sometimes it can be really fun if you get there in the start and actually manage to join the press pack. You get a whole different viewpoint. And it's great, it's actually great fun. Granted, you're having to go baquards quite quickly, as they quite often come forward. I've done that in a few ones now and it's just been great fun. but so often in parades, actually the people around a parade are more interesting than what's going on in the actual event itself. So this is where Brad and Mike have very kindly volunteered to be guinea pigs without actually having the briefing beforehand. Booby trapped, in other words. So Mike, if we can start with yours first.
Yeah, that's fine.
So so trying to make this a little bit interactive. So so this was your hanging plan.
Yeah.
Thoughts, ideas now? Now I've actually gone through and done sort of what they're looking for.
The big one that probably stands out for me is sizing, especially the middle row. The sizing's all over the place, and also I particularly wanted to do a natural history panel, but on reflection now for the LRPS, I do other stuff as well. I do landscapes, I do infrared. You know, to show a range of skills, although there is, I guess, a range of skills there. You know, I guess I could have put other genres in as well. Yeah,
and this is the challenge, as I said. The more similar, if you have one subject matter like natural history here, it is harder to show a range of techniques than if you have a variety of different subject matters. And I think what works really well is you've got the bookends. He's looking in, they're looking in. You've got the bookends either side. As you said, sizing these little wasps here. You've got portrait, square, landscape. Yeah. So you could almost, and I'm sort of, I've had a little fiddle with your images. So looking at options of panels going forward, just sort of to discuss it further. So alternative layouts. So here's just sort of playing a little bit. So not looking at actually whether the images meet the criteria or not. This is just looking at how do we fit them together. So I mean, he makes such a strong central image, such a strong dominant face. He really works very well in a central position. These two are squares, so the two at either side are squares, so they create balance. And then you've got the portrait crops at the top. You have the green tones mirroring each other. You've got the warm browns of the two birds mirroring each other. And there's green in the blue jay, I think he is, and the fly. And you've got sort of the lightish, airish tones. They're a little bit stretchy at the two at the bottom. They still more or less work. Another option playing in terms of panels is, once again, your insect. You can tell I don't do natural history, is the insect, sorry. The insect on the green leaf. It gets worse, Brad, but you haven't actually named half your images, so I'm just randomly naming them as I go along. I actually forgot at one point, actually these aren't the proper names. So the insect in the middle, he's vertical, he makes a strong central image. Then you've got the bookends either side. The bottom row is sort of the very warm greenish tones, and then you've sort of very warm brownish tones, and then you've got more greenish in the middle images in the centre and the bluish. As I say, it's all about making it, as we said, and obviously you put it together without having the briefing, but it's all about making it look like you've thought about how you put the layout together and actually thought about how the images work together. And we're talking about a variety of images. And I think this is one of the challenges. So I just kind of group them like this to sort of see the similarities. You have two birds in flight with, which shows controller shutter speed, background out of focus. But then you've got four very similar birds on reeds, sticks, branches. They're done, and I think one thing to think about was all these images, the crop's very similar, they're very central in the frame, and they're very similar viewpoints. And it's just looking at how introducing more variety into that. And I say this is not about, and this is from at this level, it's not about personal style per se. This could be your personal art style. This might be how you want to show things, but it's just showing diversity. And then you've got some number of close-up macro images at the bottom. He's probably, I'd call him, he's an insect with a blurry background. He stands out a little bit from some of the others, but there's a lot of, but there is a lot of similarity across them. And I say it's not saying any of the images are bad or anything. It's just looking at how does it actually fit the criteria? What are they looking for? And this is where, and I say, it's almost like it's a different art to how you normally photograph. And I say, if I was judging, I would never judge and get into this detail, but it's all about the technical minutiae. It's not about the storytelling. It's not about the creativity. It's not about the artistry. It's a technical minutiae. So what I've done is I've kind of gone through and talked about sort of strong points, skills it's showing, and some areas of potential risk if you were to submit. So here, obviously showing good use of depth of field, control of shutter speed. What they'll be looking at is the eye sharp. So here your eye is sharp. And I say some of the things is actually, you've presented yourself with a real challenge when you're doing wildlife, because the eyes are very small. These things, they're often not standing still. It's much harder to get an eye of a bird sharp than having a portrait eye sharp or having a building. So you do present yourself with additional challenges, but they don't judge on difficulty. They judge on technical end result. So woodpecker, once again, depth of field, composition. I think areas of concern. We're talking about, does the subject, one of the things I look at is, does the subject really stand out from the background? Your tree trunk is quite bright here, so it does draw the eye, and it competes for attention with the woodpecker itself. The woodpecker is, I like how he's coming in the diagonal. You've got good separation from the background. But I'd also say the sharpness of the eye is just that little bit on the borderline. It could potentially be a risk. Gannet, bird in flight. So obviously good use of shutter speed. You've captured him and captured the movement. Background out of focus. He stands out clearly. There's nothing distracting there. I would say, once, as with all of them, it's very central in the frame. Here, I feel like he could they're probably the feedback he would probably get is he could do with a little bit more space in the frame. He feels that a little bit cramped in the frame. They like to see a little bit more space around. However, he has, one of the things it also shows, you've got whites. One of the things I look at is control of highlights. So when you've got bright things such as snow, foam on water, light coloured animals, that's one of the things you can prove. I actually can control my highlights. And here, that didn't look as if there's any burnt out areas. So that sort of demonstrated that. Here, say, it's creative composition, depth of field, clear separation, colour harmony across the whole, appropriately sharp. I feel this is probably sort of one certainly would work pretty well in the panel. I think I actually judged this one as well. It looks just familiar.
Yeah, you did.
I've got a good memory. Then mating dronefly. Now this is where I'm not even going to claim to be a macro. So I don't know where their natural, how precise they're going to be on this. I'd say, are the eyes sharp enough? And are they going to be looking, and this is where you need to go for advisory day, what level of depth of field are they going to be looking at? Are they going to be looking for the whole insect to be in focus, such as focus tacking, or are they going to accept the fall off due to the depth of field? And that is where an advisory day would be able to give you advice on what they'd accept and what they wouldn't accept.
Yeah.
As I say, it's a different art from normal photography. Here, I mean, you've got great detail in the hair, the which image 6? Where am I? Sorry, I've lost myself now. Macro, close up, really, and I think compositionally this is really strong, has a lot of impact because you've gone in close, you've cropped him in close. It's shown a creative use of composition. He really bursts out that photo. And you've got all the detail in the hair and the eyes. He looks a bit ragtag, actually. If you look at them this close, going, yeah, he looks like he's seen better days, bless him. But you've got a lot of great detail there. Once again, we've got another macro close-up showing detail, really strong detail of hairs. I never realised hairs were so hairy. Sorry, fly. I never realised flies were so hairy. What I would think about, however, these are things they're going to pick up. The crop is very close to the edge of the leaf. Did you have more leaf there? Did you have more leaf at the top? You've also got this little bit hit, down the bottom left part of the image where the leaf has ended and you've got a bit of the background showing. That's the sort of detail they're going to look at. So I think about, he's actually also size-wise probably your narrowest image. So if you can find some additional leaf, you could resize him to actually fit him with other images of that size. I love how round and fluffy he is. I mean, he's just so round. It's like a little ball on a stick, bless his cotton socks. Aperture, depth of field, reason and angle, comes in sort of dynamic composition to use the diagonal angles, well positioned within the frame, eyes appropriately sharp. One thing to think about, your stick's still quite bright. Could you just tone that down that little bit so it's not competing for attention? But you've got good colour. One of the things I look about, when you talked about positive feedback, was they referred to colour harmony. And here there's sort of good colour harmony throughout it. He just looks like he's on drugs. I'm not sure what this Jay's doing, if this is what Jays normally look like, but
it's got a real nut addiction.
Yeah, I wouldn't mess with this. There's a bird on the edge. So obviously aperture, depth of field again. Possibly the eye just a fraction soft, a little bit borderline, but once again, in terms of with some of the other birds, you have a bird standing on a branch or a stick. So you could use one or two of those, but not necessarily have some more in. And I think you probably, as much as I love his slightly mad expression, you probably got some other stronger ones there for the actual panel itself. Goldfinch, here obviously the stick's more desaturated, it's not so bright, so it doesn't stand out. Once again, slight concern in terms of the actual sharpness of the eye, because that's what they'll be looking at, that's what they'll be checking at. But you've got this wonderful diffused background, really warm colours coming through there. So great harmony of colour. And once again, clear thought about how you compose this, how you position him, no distracting elements. So we come on to your sphere images. Our friend here, what sort of insect is it?
It's a shield bug.
A shield bug. Yeah, that's kind of self-explanatory when you look at it.
It's a forest shield bug, actually.
Forest shield bug, yeah. Now he does look like a shield. I can see where he gets the name from. So once again, macro, close up. Is the focus, is it sharp enough? Just looking at, is it really 100% sharp across the head and top area? Just to check. There seem to be some areas where the focus just drifted off a little bit. But he's well positioned within the frame. He's got a strong central position. Got good colour contrast between him and the leaves. One of the things they look at is, does the subject stand out? Is it very clear what the subject is in the image? And here he very much jumps out of the frame. Our friend here, once again, you've got a strong colour contrast between the greens and the browns, which makes them jump out. You've used creative use of composition. You haven't photographed the whole snake. You photographed part of it coming in. Slow work.
It's a lizard.
It's a lizard.
It's a legless lizard, yeah.
Okay, legless lizard. It's a slow worm, isn't it? Yeah.
It is, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. In the UK, we have things like slow worms. They don't bite, at least not poisonously bite. I like that. I don't like the concept of Australia. Too much bites there. So the eye looks appropriately sharp. One thing is just, I don't know, I think you're probably fine. Would they question this bit of grade of grass? It's slightly distracting coming across him. I think you're probably fine there, but it's just something to think about and something to be aware of and just sort of check with him. But once again, as we're talking about sort of everything, the crop and the composition is very similar across all of the images. So thinking about having different positioning in the frame, creating a different feel to the different images, just for that variety aspect. It's another close up. Here the flower's very bright. It does compete a lot for attention with the butterfly, and that's the sort of thing once again they're focusing on. Is there anything competing for attention, or the main subject? Does the main subject pop out? Is the butterfly slightly pixelated across it? Is the quality there? Or is that part of actually the butterfly's natural wings?
Scales.
It's scales.
It's the square scales, yeah.
I didn't know they had square scales.
Yeah, squarish.
So yeah, so that's obviously then what you'd expect to see. I'm learning. But I think, but the composition, once again, you've got to in place at diagonal angles as a dynamic composition. Yeah, he's just cute and gorgeous. So grey seal pup, I think you've got strong colour harmony between him and strong colour harmony across the image. He stands out well. You thought clearly about the composition, but I think what's also really important here is your fur feels soft. You often see fur which has been over sharpened, and it no longer feels like they've got fur. It feels almost like the animals have got scales or harsh hair. Here he feels soft, he feels fluffy, and that's what you expect to see with fur. I think he stands out well from the background. He's positioned well in the frame. So I think he looks strong. Carrion control. Obviously he's black, so challenges are, obviously I had a chance to put this in Lightroom so it can actually tells you where bits are a bit blocked out a little bit. So you've got good, it started to go a little bit blocked out around there and there. This is one of the challenges of a blackbird. But you've got good light, you've got good detail across all his feathers. You have slightly lost the sharpness on the eye itself there. But including something dark, such as him, can actually work quite well in a panel, because if you demonstrate that you control the blacks, you control the shadows, you have detail in the shadows, then that works against you. Once again, it's showing to the judge, this is, I can demonstrate I can technically control the exposure. So that's kind of gone through. Does that, any questions on that? Does that sort of make sense?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. I think the big thing is just, as we said beforehand, it's just putting the variety in there.
Yeah.
And getting that, and just actually looking at the 11th image and sorting out the sizing of the panels. Yeah. As I say, it's a difficult thing because this is not about creativity, it's not about artistry, it is the little technical details that they'll check. It's all about reassuring them that you are technically competent. So they'll be looking for the minute things. But it's just presenting itself in the best possible way that you don't give them any scope for doubt.
You mentioned about naming, Caroline. There's no names involved in any of this.
No, there's not namings involved in the panel. They won't look at the names of things. But when I refer to them and talk to them, I've had to write notes.
Yeah.
So I've got things. So I think you named a few of them. Then I started going down to plant thing, pigeons. Yeah, no, but no. When you actually do the panel, they don't look at the names of the images. They don't take that into account.
This is very different from what we're normally used to in club competitions, where the names have a big importance.
Absolutely, it's a different thing altogether. Yeah. But when you go to, where it also varies as well, when you go to the A and the F, which is project based, you do something called the statement of intent, and you have a fixed word limit, and it's basically like a name of a photograph on steroids, because you need to describe what you are trying to convey with that panel of images. What's your intent and what are you trying to show? And then the panel of images needs to match that. You can actually have amazing images, but if it doesn't match the statement of intent, then you can actually fail, or you will fail. But one of the things also with regards to this is and I think this is a real strength of the RPS, it's not whether the assessors like it, it's not whether it's assessors' style, it's does it meet LRPS, does it meet the criteria? ARPS, does it meet the statement of intent? So they take out that personal element to it a lot more than sort of other situations. And I mean, I've seen a judge, I've seen an assessment day. It was a panel of fairly scantily clad young ladies. Well, actually, scantily clad would be an overstatement. And you could see the assessor, you could see his first reaction was like, yeah, not really that impressed with the approach. But then it's not about whether I agree with you doing objectifying women in this way. It's, does it actually meet your statement of intent? Have you achieved what you set out to achieve? So it takes that whole personal element altogether. So, yeah, as we said, we have, you put these panels together before we actually went through what the requirement is. I like the way you've got the layout. It's clearly well thought about. It's potentially too creative for the RPS, however. If it's a print panel, they wouldn't even be able to do this. It was something I'd actually ask the question, if you're doing, they have templates on the RPS website to help people put together hanging plans. They don't say whether these are and you must put them together like this. So I'd actually ask, if you go to an advisory, I'd actually ask the question, bring a couple of versions. This is the creative hanging plan, or do you need something more conservative? So it's clearly thought out. It works well together. It works well as a consistent whole. It may just be pushing them out a little bit outside their comfort zone. So based on what I've said so far, have you got any thoughts, comments? Go on to the rest.
Well, I think the first thing is I didn't really understand the 11th image bit, and I thought the 11th image was something that you had in reserve, as it were.
I wasn't going to mention that bit.
And so that one in the top right-hand corner, it shouldn't be there really. Yeah, so I wondered about the layout, and they are different. You know, there are some that are different sizes, and particularly the lily could have been bigger, and that would have helped. I think there's some diversity there, certainly, and a range of techniques as well. I just struggle a bit with colours because I'm partially colourblind, so that was a bit more difficult. And so therefore sort of tones as well in cover images particularly.
I think it feels, I mean, in terms of tonal, I mean, obviously, so there's challenges with this. It feels relatively balanced because you've got these strong monos as like more or less central. I say it's an unusual layout, but then you've got these two are sort of lighter toned, and they mirror these are two are lighter toned as well. So it's not just the colours, it's also the tones as well. These two feel together, those two feel together, so they feel like matching pairs. Then you've got these two which are blue, which feel like they match as well. But because of the creative layout, if you've been a traditional panel, these two may not work together. But actually, I feel within the creative layout, this almost forms a strong central image, which you have the mirrored pairs around it. I think from a design sense, personally, I think it fits together well, and you've got sort of bookends either side of it. But as I said, it's whether it's pushing it too much outside their comfort.
What about the background? I mean, I've chosen a sort of neutral grey there because images look different on white and black backgrounds, don't they? And
yeah.
Is there any guidance around that?
No, they don't actually. The hanging plan itself, they don't assess. This is just to tell them how they should view the images.
Right. Well, because if you put that on a black background, it would look completely different.
Yeah, absolutely.
The images would look different.
So
if you put in a white background, they would look different as well.
Yeah, but so it's, as you said, I mean, the background does influence, but looking at the overall tones and where the similarities are, they do work pretty well together in terms of the balance. Obviously, the background will affect the intensity of the colour and the brightness of the colour, but it doesn't change the overall feeling. If the images mirroring each other have a light feel,
yeah,
they're still, it's that balance across the panel itself as opposed to the individual colours.
mm.
It's also, once again, once you put the panel up on the actual, well, when it's in the screen, or you put the panel up on the stands, how do they work together? I'm not sure how the RPS, now in COVID times, when they've gone digital, I'm not sure how they assess. I assume they probably assess on a white background, I'm not sure. But once again, it's not the richness or intenseness of the colours. They'll look at the individual images separately. It's just, how does it all work together as a whole? How does it work as a big picture together?
Mm-hmm.
So I had a little fiddle as well in terms of layouts for more conventional options. And it's just once again looking at sort of more conventional approaches. So you've got there's a variety of different ways you can do it. It was looking at sizes, looking at brightness, looking at colour tones. Here you have the two monos. I mean, this is a very strong central image. Oh, sugar. As long with this one as well. So they make really strong dynamic central images. And then the two either side of this are very much darker toned. Then you've got the two, I should stop waving my mouse around, it doesn't like it. The two ones in the middle at the bottom, bluer toned, and you've got this lighter feeling at the edge. So once again, it's looking at how do they balance each other out across the image itself. And going to 2 rows. It's interesting enough, when I did my LRPS, they strongly pushed for having 2 rows, not 3. Now there seems to be more open to 3 as well. There's no rule saying you couldn't have 3 rows, but they did really strongly encourage you to have 2. But now if you look at the hanging plans and templates, it's definitely embraced the option 3 rows as well. But this is also where I talk about not falling in love with any particular image and having to fiddle things. Because that image on the right of the tree, I mean, as a standalone image, it was all about the contrast, that bright background. It was really dynamic. And I've kind of put this here just to say, but if you put that bright orange background here and mirrored it with the chair on the left, it would have felt unbalanced. So it's having to almost remove yourself a little bit from the image. Does it still work from a design point of view and an image point of view, even though it's not the actual how you envisage it initially? How can you fiddle with things to get them in such a way that you create that slightly more balanced feel? And as I say, I had to do it with mine, a massive amount. Just don't stretch people, it doesn't work. But once again, you've got that really strong dynamic central image, and some images really lend themselves to being central images. And so that building in the middle, at the bottom middle, it's a really strong arresting feel. And the birds at either side on the bottom, they've both got that bluish tone, they've both got that light feel. They also make good bookends. Also, I can't remember whose panel I did this. I may have done both of your panels. When I was actually moving images around and playing with the panels, you also flip things. I did that on mine as well. It's like, it looks, you need something on the right. It would work from the right, apart from the fact it's facing the wrong direction. Flip the image so it creates that bookend, so it keeps you in. So as I said, it's a different discipline from creating single images. So the first one shows really strong elements of visual design, harmonious colour palette, strong communication and storytelling. The one little thing, they'll look out for little details and little niggles. Whilst your the floor where the actual chair stands, your vertical line is pretty straight, but your horizontal line, I just played a Lightroom, it's just that little bit off. You can just, as I just had a little play just as I wasn't too sure. So it's something which you can just fiddle with in guidelines and just straighten. It's the sort of niggly thing they will be looking for. And it's, once again, it's all about not giving them any room to doubt. And I think also another way of thinking about this as well is in terms of little details like that. I remember years and years ago, I was having to go through application forms for a job. And it's the ones which were structured, well written, grammatically correct, and you got an initial really strong impression. you didn't go into as much detail. They instilled a feeling of confidence, but ones where it was really messy, poorly written, you kind of created that doubt. So you naturally, as a human person, you look further. So you've created that initial doubt. So it's just take it from that top level, just take anything out of the way, which will create that level of initial doubt. So they don't look too closely. They feel more confident. Psychology, C scale. So different subject matter, good sorts of visual awareness, the smallness of the people in the frame, the composition, the fact they're separated from the background, clear figure to ground relationship, the mood and the atmosphere. One thing to actually be careful of, so we talked about halos, and this is things they pick up. So over the far mountain, and it could even be natural, and sometimes you do get natural halos, then you just need to colour it in because it will give them a reason to doubt. So over the far mountain in the distance, and also the one just below, there's just that slight bit of white halo creeping in. So just at the very edges. So it's just, that's the sort of thing they'll be looking for. So here, this one always got a slightly out of left. Once it's showing strong awareness of light and control. Just be careful once again in terms of exposure. They'll be looking for burnt out bits. This is not arty at all. It's just, if this was a photograph coming in a normal situation, it fits. But the bit at the back there is just that little bit burnt out. Just lift that highlights, just drop the highlights just that little bit. Or do you know about levels in Photoshop where you can actually, the bottom bit where you can move to 245 just so there's no paper white?
Yeah, there's no paper white in that image.
It comes up on light, when I put it in Lightroom, it actually comes up as burnt out. It comes up as red.
That must be a JPEG artifact then, so that's interesting.
Possibly. Yeah, then it might be also, so you've got that little bit of banding, colour aberration around here as well. I can't see mass between in the sky. You've got the sort of the yellow going into the pink, and there's just that little bit of.
Yeah, I think that's JPEG artifact too. So just thinking about when you, if you're presenting these as JPEG images, they're going to be much bigger, aren't they? Because I can't remember what size it was now, but they're bigger than the sizes that I sent you. So those sorts of artifacts will become less obvious, won't they?
Yeah, they'll give guidelines as what size to present. But I say this is one of the advantages of print, because you just know 100%, you know what they're seeing.
Yeah.
You've just got that control element to it. But I mean, if you find out what size, the website will say what size they
does,
commit with, and to see how it actually looks coming out of that.
It's about 4,000 by something, I think.
Yeah.
About 4x3.
Did you do yours at comp size, Brad?
Yeah, they are.
Yeah, I did. Yeah. 1920 by 1440.
Yeah. They're either 1920 or 2048, one of the two.
Yeah. And as I said, this is why I stuck mine in print, because you know exactly what they see.
Yeah, right.
It costs more to send. It's a pain in the neck, but you have control. It's a control thing, basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
So here, I think talking about different, one of the things in visual awareness was light. Here you've got the strong use of light, creating light and shade and depth across in the 3D feel across the building itself. The pig is pink. It stands out well from the best background. It's got humour and personality. I think and good sort of storytelling content. So I think from this point of view, it would work well. It also makes them smile, which always helps. You need to cheer assessors up, get them in a good mood. Building mono, one of the things I'll be looking at is tonal range. And here you've demonstrated that you can not only do a mono conversion, but you have a strong tonal range throughout it. It doesn't feel flat. this is probably then, oh sugar, the mouse is going to be the death of me. I'm being really good at not swearing. This is probably then the JPEG, but there's a touch of banding creeping in up on the sky, and that's probably once again the JPEG artifact. They will be something they will be looking for. They also look for it in print. Do you have any banding in your printing? I think you said this was a lily, didn't you?
Yes, it's a
yes.
star lily.
I'm renaming it from plant thing then to lily. Here, once again, you've got a different subject matter, showing different technique, showing versatility. So with a variety of different subject matter, it works really, really well, because you show that you can actually, you're competent technically, you can turn your hand to a whole range of different subject matter. So it's creating that feeling of comfort with them. Yeah, so subject stands out well from the background, good contrast, appropriately sharp, appropriate depth of field. So once again, it ticks the boxes, it reassures them. The fish apple, as I've called it. This is where we start getting creative, sorry. So it shows creativity, a strong sense of design. The one thing I just look at on the original is the edges of the apple and the edges of the actual wood grain getting that little bit soft. Just have a look at on the original. Is that still crisp, appropriately crisp at the edges? Just something to check. But I mean, it's good sense of awareness, good sense of creativity, demonstrating skill in processing. Or you've got some very strange apples up at Lancaster.
Yes.
Kids. So once again, we've got a mono, good range of tones. You create mood and atmosphere, showing awareness of compositional positioning with the children. Their heads are, they're separated from the building. They stand out well from the background because they're quite dark in the back, and the horizon, the sky is quite light. Once again, check whether this is a JPEG artifact or not, but you've got halos going around the building and going around the children. You're rapidly coming around to thinking of Preece, aren't you?
Well, yeah, I'm starting to think that, yes. all of a sudden, because I mean, a lot of these I printed off, and there's no halos on the print for sure.
Yeah, as I said, it's all about making sure you know exactly what they see. But other than that, I think it works really, really well. Yeah, once again, showing variety of technique, clear sense of design and composition. You've placed him very much in the centre of the image, but the three raised bits of ice around him, so you've created that triangle framing him. And this is obviously, you know the Arctic, you know the environment. One of the things I'll be looking out for is there a colour cast? Is it all as blue as that, or is that what you'd actually expect to see? They'll have more experience of going to the Arctic. So it's just making sure that the actual colours are representative, or wherever this was taken.
Yeah, it was the Arctic, and it was those colours, yeah.
And that's one of those things, is that they'll just making sure that actually it's appropriate, and they'll have awareness of what they expect to see from there.
I've got a photograph of an iceberg, and it's bright blue, and it's because the ice gets compressed by the weight in the glaciers, and we picked a bit out of the water. And took it back and had our gin and tonic, and you've got this bright blue ice in your gin and tonic.
Oh, fantastic! You need to have Bombay Sapphire. I think that's in the blue bottle, isn't it?
It's bright blue. It's astounding. Yeah.
I think I was watching a documentary or something. I think it was something about how that gets, and I think it was something about seasonal or something. It demonstrates the blueness of the ice. Demonstrates something about the seasonal conditions, I think, when it goes that blue. I can't remember what it was now.
It's because the ice gets so compressed, it squeezes all the air bubbles out, and so you get absolutely airless. And because it's obviously been there for hundreds of years, it's been pushed and pushed and squashed and squashed and squashed, and yeah, it's astounding. It's unbelievable unless you see it. I'm
very jealous of you having gone there. It's a long-term bucket list. It must have been amazing.
It was absolutely astounding, yeah.
So tram, so strong awareness of usage of colour, mood, composition, works very effectively, and all the elements of it. So that is your 10 main images. Then gosh, we're running over. We're running over slightly. Do you want to go with the spares, or? So I can't see a timer here.
I do.
Okay.
Yeah. So we'll go through the spares. So here, creative use of shutter speed, also sort of strong monochrome. Just be a bit careful in terms of these areas of highlights, just that bit overly bright. And it, once again, it could be the JPEG, where when I put it through Lightroom, it just came out as that bit burnt out.
Right.
Yeah, and it's once again, it's a difference between creative photography and keeping the LRPS assessors happy. But I mean, I think the use of the actual, it's really good use of movement of the shutter speed to create that movement blur, or the effect you've done to do it. Yep. Depth of field appropriate, shown compositional awareness in terms of where you've placed the bird. He's placed against that white area, which works very effectively in making him stand out. He's not, if he'd been placed on the line between the white and the orange, it wouldn't have been as strong. It's creating that really strong figure to ground relationship. Strong design element to how it's, just be conscious of just this little bit under there coming out as just that little bit. Once again, just check on the original whether that is on the original or just the JPEG. But other than that, I think he's really strong. And once again, it's showing range of different skills. So great sense of creativity, and sort of design, lighting. Obviously here, very much you've been in charge of the lighting, so you've controlled how this all appears. Did you build this yourself, or was this all put together in Photoshop?
No, I built it. I collected cardboard boxes for a year and filled the garage with them. And then we've got a school opposite us, and one Saturday I took them all out to the playground and built it.
Yeah.
And then photographed it there. And it was windy, and so they started blowing over.
Oh, no.
What I really wanted to do was to set light to it and have it all in flames. But I didn't think I'd get away with that even in the school playground. So
I don't know. It's an odd expression. Don't ask permission. Ask for forgiveness.
yeah.
Once you set fire to it, they can't argue. Anyone here who's going to go into arson, I didn't say that. Disclaimer. Here, I think it's creativity of design, but I think what they'd come back with feedback is it lacks a strong focal point. I think they'd be looking for a stronger focal point with it. There does appear to also, oh sugar, touch the mouse. In terms of the actual, some of the shoes, they tend to a little bit of loss of quality, a little bit of grain coming into them, a little bit of loss of sharpness. So the creativity is there, but I think this is probably, out of all your images, in terms of suitability for LRPS, probably the one I'd actually definitely leave. As I said, it's all talking about the LRPS now, not actually about it as an image as a whole. Idle. So strong sense of visual design. Thing to be aware of, once again, given their slight obsession with blocked out shadows, yes, some of the areas on the underside of the wings, from the image I've seen, the JPEG, they have lost that little bit of detail. And it's one of these things, I suppose one image possibly you may just about get away with it, but it will cause them doubt and cause them to look at other images more closely. So it's just, you don't want to give them any reason to examine all your images more closely than they're already doing. And this is also where we come into artistry versus technical bit. you've got the building leaning over to the right. Could this cause them to question whether it's an artistic choice or whether you haven't actually paid enough attention to the detail? So it's just not giving them any reason to question. And it's not strong enough a lean to make it feel an obvious decision. So it's just something which could put that little bit of doubt in. Is this intentional, or has he just not paid enough attention to it? Also, looking at the bottom, you've got just that little bit at the very bottom of the, I don't know what you call it, but the floor below the end of the wall.
Yeah.
And it's like they could pick that up for attention to detail and say that should you have cropped it off above that. So it's just something to think about once again in terms of things they could pick up on. But once again, in terms of mono, it's a strong mono conversion. You've got good tonal range through there, and actually, as the mono conversion itself it works well in terms of showing the skill for doing that. Then we have the I call it muse building. Once again, it's strong sense of composition, strong sense of visual design, strong sense of creativity. One thing they might pick up on, as this is a mono conversion, the building itself the whites feel that little bit grey. They might feel that actually it feels that little bit flat. They might be expecting them to see them a little bit brighter. So once again, it's just showing, even if it was that little bit grey and it's an artistic decision, it's just creating that whole sort of depth and composite and tonal variety. But as I said, very strong design, very strong sense of composition, sort of strong visual awareness aspect of it. Yeah. Here, it's very much one of the things to talk about is communication, decisive moment. Here, you very much captured that in terms of the relationship between the two of them. We talked about tonal range, mono. It does overall feel fairly grey. It's not a great tonal range there. This could potentially cast doubt into their mind. I'd almost wonder if do you have a colour version of this?
Yeah, I think the colour version's better overall.
Because I mean, you've captured a really great moment between the two of them.
Yeah.
So it's possibly looking at sort of, if you wanted to include them, looking at, as I say, the mono for what they're looking for, the tonal range is not great enough. Yeah. So it's looking at possibly having the colour one then.
Yeah.
Bear in mind, you were supposed to only include 5 spares, not 15. Once again, strong sense of visual design, strong storytelling. In here, once in the mono, you've got that variety of tones. Trousers a bit blocked out. You might just get away with this one. Just something to be aware of. One thing they may do, and it depends on who's assessing this. They may say, in terms of visual awareness now, you've got a standing in front of the post. Should you have a standing at the side of the post? So it's just something you may have made that conscious decision, but a more conservative person would have created that separation, had the separation between her and actually the post itself, and had her where the post isn't. So it could possibly cause that reason for doubt in terms of separation aspect of it. So we're not talking about creativity, we're talking about nitpicking here and what the things they're looking at. But I think she's great. I love the cigarette out of her mouth. I love the expression. I think she's really well captured. Egret, shutter speed, frozen motion, displaying natural behaviour. It's got something in its mouth. You've got a lot of the grass crop coming in at the bottom there. They're going to look at that and they're probably going to put that down as so that it's not enough there to make it feel intentional. So they're probably going to pull it up in terms of attention to detail. Also checking on the actual original as well. On the version I had, he looked that little bit burnt out at the sort of the top back of his neck. Just check on the original to see whether that is or not. But otherwise, it's looking at sort of range of what you're demonstrating. Obviously, he's very light coloured, so it's control of highlights. You're demonstrating ability to control highlights. but very much from the shutter speed and once again, natural history, you've included something different. And there's nothing distracting really around him. He's clear separation from the elements. Pigeons, this is where I get into my own naming again. This is for the least creative name. You can see what my photography is like when I name things. I'm absolutely terrible at naming stuff. Here, once again, strong sense of visual design, strong sense of creativity, monoconversion, you've got a broad tonal range. I think you'd have to check the area underneath the metal the birds are sitting on is blacked out. I think you probably could get away with that one. So I wouldn't necessarily even expect to see detail. There probably isn't any detail. Just think about it, just double check, just check. If you put it forward for us advisory day, just check with the assessors, would this be something which could create a problem? But for me, it's something you wouldn't, I don't even know if there'd be any detail there to see underneath it all, because it actually works with the theme. The pigeons, you've got good separation. Yes, the middle two slightly overlap, but it's only the tails, their heads are separate, and that's the important bit which counts. And also you've got the 3 and the 1, so you've created that balance across the image. Here, so very strong storytelling. I'd say possibly out of all the images, because the richness of the colour of this one, it would be a central image probably, because I think it'd be quite hard to match up with some of the other images. But sort of very much sort of creativity. One thing to look at on the original, and I say this is nitpicking, I mean, I think it's a stunning image, but one thing to pick up on the original and look at, if you look at the darks of his, the 2 guys in the dark jackets, there's a little bit of chromatic aberration coming through on the JPEG, little bit of noise, just a fraction. Is that coming through in the original, or is it just the version I've got? So it's just something, because chromatic aberration is one of the things they pick up on. But obviously in terms of the light, the awareness of the light, the mood, the atmosphere, the use of colours and everything else, it works very, very effectively. But remembering this is not about artistry, it's not about creativity, this is technical minutiae. Once again, good tonal range, the use of fog to create separation between the people and the background. They've got separation between the people and the dogs, and the use of the visual awareness of the use of the actual road curving through, taking you through the image. Once again, this is a very, and I think when I did the potential options for panels, ideas, this is once again another sort of very strong central image. It just begs to be in the centre, both by its layout and its dominance and its colour. Here, very strong use of visual awareness, depth of field, you're aware of the actual shot behind it doesn't distract. Sense of colour, using that, the red of the jacket, just really makes the subject pop out. And the crops, I think it all works very effectively. But it's very much sort of a central image type image.